Hello and welcome to Dialogue. As the security officials and experts gather in Singapore for the annual Shangri-La Dialogue, the world is experiencing profound changes, bringing with them greater uncertainty and instability. A key area of focus this year is the security landscape in the Asia-Pacific region, set against the broader backdrop of intensifying U.S. competition with China. To gain deeper insight into the regional security dynamics, U.S. policies toward China and Asia-Pacific, and the role of ASEAN, I'm honored to speak today with Ambassador Chan Heng Chee, Ambassador at Large with Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Ambassador Chan, welcome to our show. It's an honor to have you in our show. And of course, we are here to cover this Shangri-La Dialogue of 2025. So what are the major topics we are expected to have in this year's dialogue?
Well, the topics are not different from previous years. You know, every year, great power competition comes up, US-China competition, regional conflicts, challenges to security, new challenges to security like cyber, undersea cable, outer space, proliferation, regional conflicts. Actually, they're just updated for currency, you know. But I think this is an unusual year because of the Trump effect. President Donald Trump has been elected president in the United States, and he has come in as a self-described disruptive figure and transforming, you know, transforming figure. And because of that, you know, we have seen him strike the global stage, take his place on the global stage very differently from American presidents before. And that's why this year's Shangri-La Dialogue will be quite interesting.
Taking into consideration of the Trump factor, how do you look at today's global security landscape?
The global security landscape looks more unpredictable and more uncertain today. It's always been unpredictable and uncertain. But I think it's become more so now because of the United States, which has been quite ambivalent about its global role for a while, became much more certain under the Biden leadership. But President Trump now says that it's America first. He has a particular idea and view of how he wants to solve the global problems, the Ukraine war, the Middle East. And so, you know, people are looking at how he's doing this. I think the United States was hoping to come out with a deal with Russia on Ukraine, but it's harder to achieve because it seems President Putin is not ready to do that. But President Trump is trying to do something in the Middle East, and he's doing something, and that's interesting, but in a manner which is not conventional. So it's been very interesting, and countries are just watching how he will handle the issues. And of course, allies have been asked to pay more for their security, to carry their load of to carry the burdens as well.
And of course, the tariff war.
And of course, he's launched a tariff war, a trade war. And I think President Trump has always felt that other countries are eating America's lunch. That why is America, you know, getting all these trade deficits, whereas other countries enjoy the surpluses? And he would like to reverse that flow, and he believes tariffs would do it. I think President Trump is also interested in returning manufacturing back to America and start America and get America to produce things again. He's also questioning the liberal international order externally he's also uncomfortable or unhappy with the liberal values, liberal order internally, domestically. So I think you see him taking action, and he's moved with such speed and the scope, that he's reached, and, so we see a lot of changes today. But the one thing I would say about President Trump, he's not a man of war. And from what he says, that to me is a good sign.
Right, of course, there could be a strong candidate, for Nobel Peace Prize. That's many people are talking about, of course.
Yes,
and if he can stop all the wars.
Well, if he can stop the war in the Ukraine and bring peace in the Middle East, some settlement in the Middle East, and if you can do something on the Korean Peninsula, that would be helpful.
Provides more stability in this region. That
Yes.
will be welcome.
Yes, of course, yes.
And Singapore has been one of the countries, strongest advocates for rules-based international order. Do you think that's the response, the rule-based international order, is the solution to the uncertainties and the unpredictability of today?
Singapore is a small country. In my region, there are small and middle-sized countries. For small countries and middle-sized countries, and I would say even for big countries, rule of law, a rules-based order, is the only way to go. Absent that, you will have the anarchy, is the rule of the jungle. And that is not right, because then might will be right. And even, might is right, big countries will be able to do what they want with smaller countries. And middle-sized countries can also do what they want with the smaller countries. So you can see why rule of law is very important. Article 2 of the UN Charter says that, the members are obligated or mandated to, in fact, not use the force or the threat of force against another country's another member's territorial integrity, or against its political independence. That is extremely important, you can see, for countries, smaller countries and middle-sized countries. So rule of law really refers, to me, to the UN Charter and the treaties that all the member countries, that's the global community, negotiate at the UN.
Well, you mentioned the UN, of course, this year, 2025, marks the 80th anniversary of the establishment of the UN. Probably, people will agree, this is the most important international institution of today, after the Second World War, of this existing international order. But how do you look at the role of the UN and also today's international order? Some people say they're hearing the cracks of the collapse of the international order. What should we do probably to safeguard this very important international order? I mean, order is important.
Yes. No, I have just, a few moments ago spoken about, why it is so important to have a rules-based order. But the truth is that in reality, great power has the ability to upend an order. And we see that happening. And great powers tend to be unilateral. Why go with the UN when you can go it alone? So unilateralism may be a path that's chosen. That is the reality of the international community, the global community. And that is why we've had, all these tensions and wars. So, but I would say it is still worthwhile to preserve that rules-based order. And other countries are trying to do that. Right now we have a tariff war going, and the United States has suddenly decided that it would want to sort out the global the imbalances in its way, levying unilateral tariffs, Liberation Day, walking back from some of the tariffs, the 90-day pause, and so on. But there are many countries in the world that still want to uphold the rules of WTO. And you can see it, for instance, in my region, ASEAN, we have the ASEAN Economic Community. We negotiate, is based on, WTO rules. There's RCEP. China is part of RCEP, the Regional Economic comprehensive economic partnership, and that's again a rules-based economic grouping. And there is CPTPP, which is originally it was TPP. The United States decided not to join it, and now we're left with CPTPP. And CPTPP observes these rules. So you see groupings that form a space. They want to keep a space open where the countries in that space deal with each other, trade with each other, invest in each other's countries according to WTO rules. And this rules-based system is maintained. And now there's some talk, certainly my Prime Minister and the New Zealand Prime Minister is saying, hey, what about bringing EU and CPTPP together? And recently you just saw in Kuala Lumpur, the ASEAN GCC Gulf Cooperation Council, Gulf countries, and China in another grouping. So here are there are countries forming groupings, plurilateral groups, if you want, groupings that carry out the rule of law, and you still maintain it where you can.
And of course, here the region is also, somehow impacted by the U.S. competition with China. It's a big power competition there. And from the Chinese side, for example, I quote Chinese President Xi Jinping. He once said, "The region cannot and should not be an arena for geopolitical rivalry. Still less should it be plunged into new Cold War or camp-based confrontation." What do you make of his remarks?
Well, my leaders, Singapore leaders, ASEAN leaders have all said many times too that, we do not want to choose, we do not want ASEAN to be the arena for, the US-China rivalry and geopolitics. I think we all agree to that. So we will have, no difficulties in agreeing with President Xi on that, because that's what we feel, and we've been saying this for a very long time. And I think the point about Asia-Pacific, Southeast Asia, is that for us, the United States is important. Everybody wants, I think all the countries in ASEAN welcome the US presence in the region. China is very important too. You're a huge country, you hear, and we have so much going on between China and many of the ASEAN
largest trading partner,
and so on, cultural ties and so on and so forth. And we would like to do business with both, trade with both, have good relationship with both the great powers. So we do not want to choose, and we do not want to be made to be forced, if in a Cold War develops, we hope not, to be choosing sides. That's not what we want. We want both sides, both powers, to be in the region. To have two engines is much more better than one engine. And frankly, in the region, most of us, all the ASEAN countries, want a multipolar present. We feel the Europeans should be here too. We buy and sell, buy from the Europeans, sell to the Europeans. Japan, Australia, and India. Right. So multilateral presence, a multipolar presence in the region is what we hope for.
And of course, U.S. Since 2022, they have mapped out this policy they called Indo-Pacific strategy. We have Quad, we have AUKUS, for example, this kind of military system with military elements probably, and seeing the development of these new developments. Of course, China will, in response, strengthen or reinforce its military might there. How do you see this Indo-Pacific strategy, from your point of view? Is it contributing to the stability in this region, or is it somehow militarize or destabilize this region?
The United States has been in the region for 8 decades now. When it began after the war.
The Pacific country.
They say that it is a Pacific power, and it was drawn into the Pacific War, World War II, and it's been in the region for now 8 decades. Now, during these 8 decades, there were times when they were drawn away, their eyes were taken away from the Asia-Pacific because they were caught with the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War. Then Americans generally now and again said, well, we must go back to Asia because it's such a dynamic country and there's a rising power there, China. So they pivot to Asia. Obama pivoted to Asia but didn't really keep it up. Then President Trump came up with the Indo-Pacific strategy. But at that time when it was presented, it was exclusive. In Trump administration 1.0, the Indo-Pacific strategy was exclusive and heavily military-oriented, security-oriented, let me put it this way. ASEAN countries didn't really embrace that concept, when President Biden came into the picture, when his administration took over, ASEAN countries had presented our views, and they then focused on delivering goods for the global commons, health security, vaccines, deal with humanitarian disaster relief, cybersecurity, maritime domain awareness. But it was less security-oriented, but more global goods. As I said, the global commons goods. And but ASEAN came up with its own version of the Indo-Pacific strategy. We have the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, AOIP, which is inclusive. Every country in the region can participate in it, and we'll try to achieve many of these global common goods, And so that's where it is. We saw AUKUS created, and there's Quad. Quad is now delivering this, you see. Quad is the, the vehicle to deliver the Indo-Pacific strategy. But we are still looking, of course it does add an element in the region, changes the chemistry a bit, and China is reacting. And so we're watching and hoping that both sides would, remain, calm and engaged. And whilst you are lining up coalitions that share, like-minded countries that share the same attitudes to security, we believe, and my Prime Minister, when Lee Hsien Loong, when he was still Prime Minister, in a Nikkei conference did say that you can form coalitions of like-minded to deal with your security challenges, but you must never forget to create also confidence-building platforms to engage the other side so that there's no misunderstanding.
In this process of working together, ASEAN played a very important role. At the same time, I believe, just like other regions or countries, ASEAN is also facing the challenge, for example, the tariffs and uncertainty and a chaotic world. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong said at the ASEAN summit that ASEAN leaders had, quote, candid discussions on the new realities of the world and a renewed sense of urgency for closer integration in a world upended by U.S. President Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs in many ways. This is a moment of truth for ASEAN. We have to either step up and carve out a clear, purposeful role for ourselves in this change of the world, or ASEAN will lose its relevance.
Well, ASEAN has been, I'll be frank, criticized, of being a talk shop. We're not doing very much.
Right.
Yeah, but I would say that, regional groupings are not that easy, especially when you try to bring in countries of different systems, different outlooks, different histories, and so on. And we are more varied. Everybody compares ASEAN with the European Union, but they are closer as systems, But I would say ASEAN seems to have a sort of new realization and has been reinvigorated because of the very steep tariffs. Cambodia has 49% tariffs, Indonesia 32%, and the other countries like Malaysia 24% and so on. It's from 49 down to 10, so there's a reason for us to act together. And I think ASEAN can integrate further. We've done a lot in trade in goods, but we haven't done enough in trade in services and the non-tariff barriers. We're now talking of trying to integrate further by promoting that. And trade within ASEAN countries is not that high. It's between 20 to 24% of the total.
Still huge potential.
There's huge potential. Now, that is not to say our trade intra-ASEAN has not grown. It's grown a lot, but our trade with other countries has grown even more. So though it's grown, it doesn't look as much as in percentage terms. It's remained there. So I think we have room to improve that. And that's where we can go. Because in the European Union, I understand it's like 80 to 90% intra-European trade, so there is room. But more than just integrating better, tighter in ASEAN, ASEAN is also diversifying its markets. ASEAN countries have been looking for solutions, expecting this protectionism from the United States to come, even before President Trump was elected. So we've been signing trade agreements with Global South, different ASEAN countries. With Mercosur, they go to Latin America, to the Gulf states, and going to Europe. Everybody wants to sign a free trade agreement with Europe. And with even the Eurasia Association Economic Union, which, is really made up of Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Russia. Indonesia signed such an agreement. Now, that's very out of the box. So it shows that we are diversifying, not to just depend on one large market.
Of course, you have been used to stay in the U.S. as ambassador, the longest serving ambassador to the U.S. I mean, you know the U.S. very well, expert on the U.S. affairs. So that's the time from 1992 to 2012. So what was your impression of the U.S. back then, and how is it different from now in the evolvement from that U.S. to today's U.S.?
Let me say that I arrived in the United States in the July of 1996. America was at the height of its hegemonic powers. Cold War was just over. For that, they had that unipolar moment. It didn't last that long, but that was a unipolar moment. So America was full of confidence, When I left America in July of 2012, the global financial crisis, the great financial crisis in America had happened. The banks collapsed, mortgages, you know the story. I saw an America that had lost its confidence. And, they go from very confident to no confidence. And I have to say, cheer up. It's not as bad as you think. Right. But America was then really in a different state. And America lost its confidence. And they were criticizing themselves and where they went wrong. And it has this ability to self-criticize quite a bit. So that was the America when I left in 2012. And during this time, China rose. Rising China, the rising power really, rose. And China's rise since 2000, when you joined WTO, really, that's been phenomenal. I think suddenly from being very confident to no confidence, but as I said, America is very resilient. Its economy picked up again, and after Obama in the second term, it was picking up. And during Trump also, the first term, stock markets came back again. And America was doing very well. And they were very innovative, and you had ChatGPT and all the new tech, yes. AI developments. But China has developed greatly too. And I think around post-2012, in the later period, suddenly one day America around 2015, I guess 2017, I don't know, realized China had become a peer power. It was a peer rival. You know, at the time when it was caught in the financial crisis, they hadn't looked, and before they knew it, hey, China was buying some American banks, you know, and it was growing in its innovation too. And so as a peer power, China had in fact developed military power, economic power, technology power, and diplomatic power. And as a result, they suddenly looked on China as a challenge, and now as a pacing challenge. So the relationship changed.
Now with the latest Liberation Day tariffs, is that a surprise to you?
Tariffs is not a surprise because President Trump, Donald Trump, has always been talking of that. But the scale and the steepness of the tariffs has really surprised me. And, you know, I've said that President Trump has objectives, but I'm not seeing the strategy very clearly.
We talk about it. China, U.S., rising China, U.S. confident or less confident, anyway, coming back. So now we are probably at a new stage, who knows, of this bilateral relationship. What do we have is that you know, the U.S.
I think it will continue to be rocky.
Yeah, to be rocky. And of course, there's the Trump administration is having, you know, using the word war on multi-fronts, domestically with Harvard, for example, or international students. Now, the recent one is they're targeting the Chinese students, for example. Secretary of State Marco Rubio wrote on X, quote, the U.S. will begin revoking visas of Chinese students, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or studying in critical fields. What do you make of such a move?
As an observer outside of the two powers, but wishing well to two powers, I would say this is not a good move because America must understand China and China should understand America. American students should go to China and Chinese students should go to America to study. Otherwise, you know, it's not good for the rest of the world. You are two huge powers, two great powers, two superpowers. And, you know, there has to be, you have to find a path for coexistence because the alternative is really not, we cannot contemplate.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about the importance of people-to-people exchanges.
People-to-people exchanges and the fact that you should learn to coexist and find a way, a level to coexist because the alternative is unimaginable.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for speaking with us.